I'm going to be prepping the apple for the Waldorf salad. Apples are one of those things that kids are not going to be able to cut with their safety knives, so we have to prep it in advance. Same with the celery, but in this salad, we do allow them to experiment with cutting on the grapes. So they're going to cut the grapes, and we're going to have done the apples and the celery for them. So here's how I like to cut the apple. I'm using a green apple because that is the color in the recipe, but you can use any color you'd like. The green ones, the Granny Smiths, tend to be a little tartar, which I actually like in contrast to the sweetness of the grapes. So I do recommend using a green apple. So you're going to find the stem, and I'm just going to cut this in half. And then I'm going to lay it down flat. I always want to be cutting on a flat surface when I can. And I'm going to cut it in half again. So now you can see where my seeds are. I'm going to lay the apple down on the side. And then I'm going to come in at a 45-degree angle. And I'm just going to cut through. So I've taken off this part. This is the core. This is how I core my apple without having to go through the thing with a corer. Like, who wants to make more dishes? Okay, so now I have this, and there's a nice flat surface here that I can lay my apple down on. I'm going to cut this into about 4 or 5 slices, depending on what kind of job I did before. For my last slice, I always like to rotate because it's easier for me to cut. And then I'm going to separate these into stacks. I have 5, unfortunately. I wish I ended up with 4 because it's even. Okay, so I'm going to line them up with my knife. I take my knife, tap. Now everything's lined up. I'm going to come through and cut about halfway. So I have 2 halves here. And then I'm going to come back the other way and just cut into these little cubes. So I cut it in half, and then I cut it all the way down, creating cubes. And this is the size of the apple I want for this recipe. It's also approximately the size of the celery. So we want to try, when you're making salad, you want to try and keep things about the same size. You don't want to have a mouthful where you have one little piece of celery and a giant piece of apple. That just feels weird in your mouth. So just keep in mind when you're prepping for salad to try and keep things roughly the same size. So now I have my apples here. I'm going to need a little bit more for my salad, but because I'm not going to be cooking this just yet, I'm just going to put a little bit of acid in the form of lemon juice on my apples and mix that up. And this will prevent them from oxidizing or turning brown and mushy. So when I have cut apples that I'm going to be using, let's say more than 30 minutes. I mean, apples tend to oxidize pretty quickly. So if it's going to be more than 30 minutes, I definitely put a little bit of lemon juice on. And then when I'm all done cutting, I'm going to put them in a airtight container and leave that in the refrigerator. And when I'm ready to cook, I just pull them out. And for this step, we can just dump those apples right in.